everybody, and welcome again. And today we start with the Civil War. Uh, and you can see here is a map of the United States as it was when the Civil War broke out. And you'll notice that there are actually four different, statuses that the United States had at this time, the various states and territories. The first, the most obvious in blue, the Union states. And you can see obviously California and Oregon there on the west coast, Kansas in the middle, and then all the other ones right there in the north. You can, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, India, et cetera, et cetera. So all the blue, those are, of course, the Union states, the northern states. Then, of course, the red ones, as you can see down here in the south, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, all the way up to Virginia up here. Then what becomes a little bit odd is what we call the border states, and those are shaded blue and red, and you can see Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, broke apart from Virginia. We have Maryland right there, and then I know it's kind of hard to see, but Delaware. Now, some books will say there's four border states because they don't really count West Virginia, but whatever. So these are the border states, and what's unique about the border states is that they were slave-holding states that actually fought for the Union. And you say, well, gee, that doesn't make any sense. The South, they're all about, pro-slavery, and if they are slave states, why don't they fight for the Confederacy? And there were various reasons to that for each individual state. A lot of it had to do with economic interests of the state, but at any rate, these states were slave-holding states that fought for the Union, and they're called border states. That becomes particularly significant when Lincoln eventually issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which frees slaves in Confederate-held territory. But we will get to that a bit later. Then, of course, this little, I don't know, brown, gray, whatever, those are territories. So these are areas that have not been organized enough or do not have enough population or don't have a constitution written where they don't qualify to apply for statehood. And so they're not states yet. They're just what we call territories. As you can see, they have some familiarity for some of the shapes that the modern day states will eventually take. So this is how the country was divided from a geographical standpoint. All right, so we move on, start of the Civil War, and if you remember from last Friday, we had mentioned that the first actual action, or shots fired, was actually at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. It wasn't really much of a battle. There's a Confederacy pretty much, just fired on the fort. They couldn't really do much. They were surrounded. But the actual, battle, which, goes both ways, not just one person getting fired on, would be called the Battle of Bull Run. Now, I guess a run is another name for a stream or a small river, you could say. And in July 21st, 1861, and you had 30,000 Union troops versus 22,000 Confederate troops. And both sides were extremely confident that they were going to win, and it was going to be fairly easily. They felt that they were going to win. In fact, some Union supporters, I know this sounds bizarre, but they packed up lunch and they actually had a picnic and went to go watch the battle. From far away, and they were expecting an easy victory. The Union was going to crush them, no problem. Well, it didn't exactly go that way. The Confederacy actually ended up winning the battle, and the Northerners were shocked. They're like, how the heck how did we lose this? This should have been an easy win. But they lost. And this sort of was, I guess, a foreshadowing of the war, the way it's going to run its course. This is not going to be an easy war. We're in the long run, I guess, is the message that it sent to the North. And of course, it made the South even that much more emboldened, saying, look, we can and we are win this thing. So the start of the Civil War did not go well for the Union. And both strategies, is interesting because both sides had a very, very different strategy. Remember, the Confederacy did not have to take any territory. They just had to resist, whereas the Union had to go and capture Confederate territory. So the main thing of the Union's goal at least the North, was to capture the Confederate capital, which was Richmond, Virginia. Now, some people think that it maybe should have been, as you can see, it's pretty close right here on the map. Some people say, well, why wasn't it Atlanta, or why wasn't it somewhere else a little bit further away from the North? And that might have been a legitimate criticism. But at any rate, the Union wanted to capture the capital, Richmond, Virginia. They wanted to blockade southern ports. So as you see these little, dots around here, that's the, blockade, meaning that you're supposed to try and prevent any ships leaving or coming in to sort of, handicap their trade ability. Cotton was obviously the main source of income for the South, but covering all this coastline, as you can see even today, with modern technology, it's difficult. I can't even imagine how difficult it would be back then, but it was at least somewhat effective. The third plan, of course, was to capture the Mississippi River and split the Confederacy in two. Now, if you can see, the Mississippi River, as you see, it starts up here and everything, but if you go right down through there, you have part of the Confederacy over here and part of the Confederacy over there, and you would effectively split them in two. The Union forces definitely had a much more difficult task than the Confederates. You go over the Confederate side, had to do is a defensive war. Come and take it from us. The Confederacy did not need to capture any northern cities or states to achieve their goal. And remember, their goal was just independence from the North. That was their goal. Now, some might call this strategy a war of attrition. Now, there's two ways to look at this. One is that attrition is the South trying to wear down the North's will to fight. The other way you might look at attrition, which would be perhaps the Northern strategy, is since we have so many more troops in the North, and you don't have quite as many in the South, if we both lose 5,000 troops, let's say, in a battle, that hurts the South way more than the North because the North has more troops and will just eventually wear you down. In this case, though, attrition means to wear down the North's will to fight. And the thinking was that if the South could make it painful for the North to wage war, and of course the pain meaning death, destruction, cost, all these things. So if the South could make it painful enough, then the North would eventually realize that the price of victory was simply too high. And they would say, you know what, we just can't fight anymore. You guys go be your own southern, the Confederate States of America, and we'll take it from there. We'll just be two countries. Obviously, that didn't happen. Now, the South, the Confederates, even though they were greatly outnumbered, as well as other things, as we'll talk about, the advantages of the railroads for the North and the industrialization, but the Confederates still had several advantages. The biggest one is fighting a defensive war. They have to come to you. The enemy has to come to you, and they have to fight on your terrain, which means that you are familiar with the terrain. You're fighting on your own land that you know. Extreme loyalty, Southern pride, the sense of how great it is to be Southern, more rural in nature, so perhaps better at hunting, horseback riding. Now that's not everyone, of course. Obviously, there's outside and farming and nature like that in the North, but the lifestyle was more rural in general. And believe it or not, obviously a lot more military colleges. You have the VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, the Citadel. Now, it's true that Annapolis is in Maryland, which is a border state, certainly, and West Point is in New York, but there was smaller, probably less familiar military colleges were more popular in the South. And so you see how the war is sort of shaping up. Both sides have advantages, but it's not going to be an easy war at all. Well, thank you so much for listening.